Hi, and welcome to The Working Songwriter, the show where today's best songwriters come to talk shop. I'm your host, Joe Pug. Each episode here, we host a distinguished guest, and we ask them to go deep on their inspiration, on their process, on the general ups and downs of making a life in music. So, whether you're a grizzled veteran using ChatGPT to generate witty stage banter, or else a scrappy upstart using it to generate upselling pitches for the merch table, this is your show, because ultimately it is what every writer seeks most, an ironclad excuse to put off actually writing. Hey everybody, it's the third Friday of April 2023, and I thank you for joining us. This week's show is brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. I'm old enough to remember when you had to pay somebody called a web developer to get a website made. It would always be some guy named David, but who asked you to call him Dagger, who drove a Dodge Caliber with custom floor mats, and who was always trying to sell you a jailbroken iPhone 3. An old Dagger would charge you about $1,000 for a website that would be obsolete in 6 months. But it's the future now, you guys. That's not how it works anymore. We're allowed to have nice things now. One of those nice things is Bandzoogle. Bandzoogle powers the websites of tens of thousands of musicians around the world, from weekend warriors to Grammy winners. All the features you need for a professional website are already built in. Hosting and a custom domain name, dozens of fully customizable design templates. This year, Bandzoogle would like to congratulate its members on surpassing $100 million in commission-free sales through their websites. The Working Songwriter Podcast listeners can go to bandzoogle.com to try it for free for 30 days. Use the promo code TWS, the initials of our show, TWS, to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. If you'd like to hear some of my music live in the coming weeks, you can check out my tour page, joepugmusic.com/tour, where there are a bevy of new tour dates posted all around the country, from Annapolis, Maryland to Pioneer Town, California. Finally, if you enjoy this podcast, if you'd like to help it remain a viable endeavor for me, here's a couple things that you could do to help. First, you could become a supporter of the show over at Patreon. Patreon is a platform that allows you to directly support creative endeavors that you find meaningful. You just head to their site, Patreon. You search for The Working Songwriter, or you search for my name, and then you sign up to kick in a few bucks every month for the show. Think of it as a voluntary subscription. A subscription that you certainly don't have to pay for, but that you choose to pay for because you dig the show and because you won't miss a few bucks at the end of the month. If just 1% of our listenership would kick in the price of a cup of coffee every month, it would make an immense difference. So thank you to everybody who's taken the time to support the show in that way. If you're not in a place where you can contribute in that way, I totally understand. You could still help us out in a couple ways that are entirely free. First, you could leave us a rating in the iTunes store. Or second, you could simply tell a friend about the show. Spread the word about the show. The simple math on those two things is that they will help me much more than they will be a pain in the ass for you. Okay, I'll end all the harassment there. It was a pleasure to catch up with my friend Dave Hause on the phone, and I hope you dig this week's episode. Peace. Our guest this week is making his second appearance on our program, and we're thankful for that. Dave Hause hails from Philadelphia, where he was an integral part of the city's thriving hardcore scene. He formed two seminal bands, The Curse and The Loved Ones, before striking out under his own name in 2011 with the debut album, Resolutions. He's recorded for Fat Wreck Records, Rise, and Jade Tree Records. He's toured with the Avett Brothers, Frank Turner, the Gaslight Anthem, Social Distortion, Bad Religion, Flogging Molly, the Bouncing Souls, and many others. Rolling Stone has dubbed him an Americana punk songwriter, and People magazine declared that his last album was filled with devastatingly honest and beautiful songs. I got a chance to catch up with Dave and hear about his musical journey since the last time that we spoke. Dave Hause, welcome back to the podcast. It's great to see your face, man.
Man, it's lovely to see your face. And, this is, in my mind, this is one of those things that you do for press that's like, yeah, but we get to kind of catch up. It's not really like an interview. It's more like Joe and I can just carve out an hour to talk.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely, man. I've been looking forward to this one. I want to get to the new record. I want to get to the festival. But I feel like since the last time I talked to you, we kind of got to unpack a little bit. You did a massive tour behind Blood Harmony, your last record that you were on the show for last time. But what's interesting about it, it's not just like any other tour. It's like that seemed, yours was one of the first like post-COVID, like I'm going all in, I'm doing all the United States, I'm doing all of Europe. I'm doing like an old school pre-COVID tour. This is like last year, 2022. How did that tour go, and how is it different, now in this post-pandemic tour world for you?
Well, this is an interesting question because it really it really leads into the making of Drive It Like It's Stolen. Because what I was struggling with in March, so we set out to do the tour in March. We started on the West Coast, and it was in that trepidatious kind of window where, especially in the more, I guess, left-leaning cities or whatever, people weren't quite sure if they wanted to wear masks at shows or go to shows. And so, if you're listening to this podcast, think of March 2022, and it was still just uncertain. And I was having conversations, sort of each day with not only the band, but also our manager, Alex, and saying, man, it doesn't seem right. Something seems off. And Alex would reply with, well, your numbers are higher than they've ever been. You had more people out to the show, almost in every city. You have empirical data telling me that the show was better, meaning it was more well-attended, or you sold more merch, or whatever. He was going off of the numbers. And I was like, yeah, but something doesn't feel right. The American city seems like it's on the verge of collapse, or, the vibe in the room is really uncertain. And this wasn't every town, but it was most cities where I just felt like, And what I realized was it was equal parts the audience had changed and I had changed. In that, I was a couple years into being a dad, and the pandemic had really changed my perspective, and I had a lot of anxiety. I had decided right before that tour to go off of Lexapro because I did this like really positive workout and diet routine that like had me feeling great. And I was like, oh, I feel great. I think I'm going to go off my meds. and then set out on this tour where, you're not working out, you're not eating as healthily. And then I was faced with kind of what the American city was looking like at the time, and the pressures of trying to sell tickets and all the, trying to keep the band happy and afloat and all that kind of thing. And I realized pretty quickly it's time to get back onto my meds.
Is Lexapro, is that like an SSRI? Or
it is.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, I'm on a low dose, and it just kind of takes the edge off. It gives me a beat in terms of reactivity. It makes me not do the Donald Duck explosion when my kids throw an egg at me or whatever. It makes me, just gives me an extra pause to assess the situation before I react.
But it's interesting, you were saying that given your druthers when you're not on tour and kept from doing the stuff that diet and exercise, there became a point where that could be that buffer for you when you're given the opportunity to do it. Interesting.
Right. But that involves a lot of discipline and a lot of hard work, just as we navigate our family. We have twin 4-year-olds, and at the time they were twin 3-year-olds. So going back out on that tour, now I guess the positive is by the time we got to Europe in September, I had been went back on my meds. I was able to kind of assess the success that we had and said, hey, Alex was right. The numbers are up and I do feel better. And I kind of got my mental back on track. And we also wrote another record, which I think like once you re-engage with the creative spirit, at least when I do, it puts a lot of that other stuff into perspective. It once you start getting songs on the board, how many people are coming or not coming or whatever, it starts to shrink in terms of its importance, because like the creative energy and that expression is the magic. That's the thing that we all kind of live for. And so once that was re-engaged, which, was also going on while we were touring and stuff, I was like, okay. So by September, when we were in Europe, it was really a joyful, pure touring experience. And we were also like playing bigger shows and on a bus, and the band was really gelling, and we kind of knew we were wrapping up work. It was like, This is it. We're ending in Frankfurt at this big, rock club, which is kind of the dream and all this kind of jazz. So I think like by the time we completed that work, I was feeling good about it and back on track, but it started pretty bumpy. It started, pretty anxious and pretty, oh my God, do I still want to do this? And,
Well, you mentioned the other thing I think a lot of us has felt, certainly I felt it, which is going back on the road post-COVID. You're like, oh, wow, yeah, I'm 3 years older now. Mm-hmm. And I just had an experience where I was playing at a club. It was overseas. It was in the UK. And I had a discrepancy with the payment at the end of the night, which isn't a big deal on one hand, but on the other hand, it's like it's got to get sorted out. And so I go and I'm talking to this bar manager because the promoter rep had left. It's late at night and I'm having, a pretty direct conversation with this person. And I'm like, this needs to get resolved by the end of the night, because I'm not leaving here without being paid. Like, it's not going to happen. I'm talking really directly. And then I realized I kind of took a global look at the situation, and I realized that this bar manager was all of like a 22 or 23-year-old girl. I'm pushing 40. Yeah. And or a 22 or 23-year-old woman, to be fair, like, an adult, but still like really young. And I'm pushing 40 and I'm thinking to myself, like, man, I'm so much older. I used to be this age group in the clubs doing it. And now I'm this old dude who's got kids and a mortgage, and I'm in here arguing with, I'm sorry, for what is for me like effectively a child, like I'm arguing with,
Yeah,
she was in fourth grade when I started touring, So it was like, do I want to continue doing this? I don't know. I don't know if I do.
Right. And well, I think getting that rejiggered and coming to terms with, yes, I do want to do it. I love it. I love the sum total of it. That is the writing of the songs, the camaraderie with the band when we do that, the creative energy with my brother, the owning of the record label. Now we've birthed the festival, which I'm sure we'll talk about here on a little bit. But I do want to do it all. But I don't necessarily need to do it in the same way we've always done it. It's okay to pivot. It's okay to say no to things. It's okay to remember you are running a small business. And, if you're not operating with some profit, then do you really want to do it? And sometimes the answer is yes, and sometimes the answer is no. But I do think, applying some changes to it all is healthy. We're not going to go through something like that and not hopefully change and reassess. And so there's been a big reckoning with that. And thankfully our little team of me and my brother and Alex, our manager, and your manager, I'm talking about him like you don't know.
Yeah, there you go.
Maybe people out there don't know, that's a weekly and sometimes daily assessment of like, hey, what do we want to do and how do we want to do it?
So what are some things that you found yourself saying no to then to keep that balance in check?
I'll let you know when we start to say no. No, I think it's just, frankly, they're ideas of mine. It's me telling myself no. It's me, getting to a point where we're releasing a much more rock leaning record. And so my instinct is to put the band out on the road. and go out and do what you described, like an old school tour. All right, we're going to play Cleveland, and then we're going to go to Pittsburgh. And Alex and Tim are good at reminding me, like, listen, the band's really expensive. Tickets are really hard to sell. You're the one who said we need to get more balance. So do you really want to do this? And is it worth the cost? And so they're really good in terms of, being the backstop for my screwy ideas or my sort of ancient ambition. They're good at saying, like, are you sure? And a lot of times I'll go, no, I'm not sure. Like, let's not. Let's leave a little bit of meat on the bone, and let's not go there. Let's wait. So it's a lot more nuanced than just like an offer coming in to play somewhere and me saying no. It's more me saying no to myself. Yeah. And remembering that, like, you're always going to be chasing the carrot to some degree. There's always going to be another thing you could do. But when you're trying to balance your whole life, is it smart? I mean, here's a great example. Yesterday, our keyboard player, Mark, who understands a lot about vans, like he had a van business where he outfitted vans and stuff. He hit me up and said, hey, there's a really good deal on a van in New Jersey. We should pounce before you guys go over to Europe, which we go to Europe on Sunday. Now, buying a van, financing that van, going through all the ballyhoo that would take. I live in California. Tim lives in Philly. This van's in Jersey. My instinct is always, okay, go, yeah, let's go. And I texted Tim, hey, can you go up to New Jersey tomorrow and maybe buy this van? It's going to save us. We have a lot of stuff coming up. Maybe it'll. And he was like, no, can we just buy a van in the summer? We can rent a van. And, so Tim is a lot more apt to say no because he's a lot better at balancing life. He's a lot better at, he's just not, he's a younger sibling. I'm the older brother.
I was about to say, that's interesting because he's a significant, like, younger sibling. Yeah. I mean, like, he's like the youngest of all your siblings. So it's like...
Yeah, he's 15 years younger, and there's three sisters between us. And I think in that, there's a lot of wisdom. There's a lot of what not to do that you learn when you've got 4 siblings ahead of you.
Right. That's, it's interesting, just to go back a little bit, you were talking a little bit about the balance of putting a band on the road. Like, okay, I'm putting out a rock record, so the band's got to be on the road versus a solo show. This is something I've been thinking a lot about recently, because it's not only selling tickets, it's, now that we're post-pandemic, how much are tickets sold for? Because I just took, so I take my, I have 3 kids, 6, 4, and 1. I take my kids and my wife to IHOP the other day. IHOP is supposed to be a budget-friendly restaurant, right? So we go in, and I take, the kids had good report cards, the older ones, so it's like, get your little, your pancake with the whipped cream smile on it. I'm going to get my hash browns and bacon and eggs. My wife will get her, egg white omelet. We'll all have coffee and orange juice. After tip, we're talking about $75 or $80.
Right.
Okay.
For IHOP.
For IHOP, okay? Now, so what should a ticket to a full rock show cost? I've been playing for a $20 to $25 ticket for 15 years now. You know what I mean? And so in my mind, I'm like, well, if it, all things being equal, and if this is what IHOP costs, it should probably cost $50 to go to a club show. Right. No one's ready to pay $50 for a club show right now, unless it's a total legacy act that you're never going to see again. So that is something. Have you interfaced with that idea at all, like post-pandemic, how much you're able to charge?
All the time. And I think the tricky thing with that is we're trying to sell tickets to a festival, right? The last time we played in Philadelphia and headlined, we did really well. We played at Union Transfer. There was a lot of people there. It was our biggest crowd to date. And I think the promoter and, he sort of leaned into this, like, well, charge less and more people will come, that whole thing. And it was like $20. Now we're putting on a festival where we're asking people to pay $50 per day. So it's a $100 buy-in, right? For 2 days of music. That's a big jump. And on some level, I'm going like, come on, we got to sell tickets. We got to sell tickets in the back of my mind. And then really my more balanced brain or objective brain is like, that's a lot to ask of people, because I think we're also in this weird swirl of like Beyonce, Taylor Swift, Bruce Springsteen, and Madonna are all going on tour. And it's not, if you like Joe Pug or Dave Hause, you probably like at least one or two of those acts I just described. Mm-hmm. And they're $1,000 to go. So if you've got a concert budget or an entertainment budget that's maybe $1,500 for the year,
right,
and you blew it on Bruce Springsteen, guess who gets axed? It's you or I, because like I don't think there's that big of a discrepancy in terms of genre anymore. I think if you like music and you go to shows, you're just as interested in seeing Beyonce as you are one of us, or at least there's a good overlap, I should say.
Yeah, so people who will go and buy tickets. Yeah.
So I'm with you that if IHOP costs a family of $570, we should be charging $200 for that family to come see us. But I also, in the same breath, I'm like, I ain't paying $200
Hell no.
to bring my family to go see probably anybody. I'm trying to get the kids out of my hair,
right,
and go with my wife. I mean, we just went down to Los Angeles on this past weekend. I'm old friends with the band AFI, mm-hmm. and they were celebrating 20 years of Sing the Sorrow, their big platinum, big record. And I was actually on that tour managing the opening band, The Explosion, 20 years ago. And so we went down and, we got the royal treatment because they're old friends. We were in the Kia Forum, like the Forum Club, and they're serving dinner, and, we were living like kings. And it occurred to me that like 15,000 people that were there paid $50 or $100 to attend. And I'm like, I can't even find my pass. Like I was very flippant about it because of my association. It was like, oh, I'm just going to go see my old friends play. They're playing this really big show. But it did occur to me about midway through, when you see this passionate outpouring for the band in the crowd, whoa, these people paid a lot of money to be here. And, AFI was pretty resolute in that they just played the album and they didn't play an encore and all that stuff. And I love the ferocity of artistic devotion. In other words, I love that they didn't do an encore. They said that they were going to play the record, and they played the record. But me, if I was up there, I would have been like, we should probably play a couple favorites at the end. Right. Like, these people paid $50 to $100. So you're always threading that needle, and you're going to have people that might not have been entertained enough. Mm-hmm. You see what I mean? Like if there's people that came and they were like, well, they didn't play their hits in the encore, maybe they don't come back. I don't know. I mean, sure. I think it's such a tricky balance to get on any level of like, how do I hold people's attention? How do I stay true to an artistic or aesthetic governing principle? It's a lot to juggle, man, because it's a crazy world out there.
It is. I think of myself when I'm a consumer of any kind of good. If I pay whatever amount of money for something and what I get in return, I don't feel like was worth it or mm-hmm. is like very, not even close to being worth it. Mm-hmm. I'm like this weird old man passive aggressive mode where I won't say anything in the moment, but in my heart of hearts, I'll carry on a holy war against whoever like who overcharged me for something, and I'll wake up at 2:00 in the morning and I'll be like, never again will you get my money. So I don't think everyone's as insane as I am, but I think everyone has a little part of that in them where it's like, man, if I paid a lot and I came out to the show, I want to get what I paid for, man.
Right, but you don't even know what you paid for it. In other words, you're trusting in this other set of people. In your case or mine, if it's a solo or a duo show, you're trusting in one person, and you're paying them and hoping that they're going to be a shaman of some kind for your night.
That they will be transcendent. They will make your night transcendent. Absolutely.
Right. And you think going in, you're like, well, I want to hear this song. And you're trusting on some level that if they're not going to play that song, that they're going to play some other song that lifts you up. And so it's a really sacred kind of covenant On one hand. On another hand, there's some drunk person spilling beer on the back of a, like, so I mean, Tim also often says to me in a sort of reassuring way, like, listen, man, it's insane to go to live music. It's totally insane. Because you want to get together, you want to party, and then you've got to get your blood balance just right if you're drinking. Otherwise, you're talking through the show or being a pest or not paying attention. And if you're not kind of drunk enough, you might be anxious. There's all these kinds of things swirling around with each individual person. And, not everybody interfaces with the lyric and the song the way we do. Not everybody holds it in that high of a regard. There's certainly a bullseye of people who do. And then there's the outer rings of that bullseye where people are like, I like the one song, or I like the three songs,
right.
Or the top 4 on Spotify, which
yep.
at this point might be 10 or 15 years old.
Right.
So yeah, it's a real balancing act. I think, that's one reason I feel like a deep kinship with you, because I think, you are moving forward. You make new records. Your audience is excited about those records. And I'm in the same lucky boat. And I think, what we're talking about, on the working songwriter, or, we're talking about the job. We're talking about the, turning that magic into an income. Mm-hmm. And I think the tendency, and a lot of our peers who have a lot more success, they can sort of yield to this process where it's like, let's play the hit last.
Yeah.
And let's
mm-hmm.
go for whatever sells the most T-shirts. And I think as I get older, as more and more of my peers yield to that, which I understand, I totally get it. It becomes more and more lonesome to be just, to sort of have my North Star be chasing the song, mm-hmm. Because it's like, on some level, a lot of my friends, a lot of the bands that I worked for, all that stuff, like they've not given up, but they've come to a place of understanding that, like, look, I get it. The band, the crowd wants to see the songs from 10, 15, 20 years ago. All right.
Yeah.
Here it is. So I think, with you or with Will, or, there's certain people that I'm friends with that do this work that are still on the forward trajectory, where they don't have to really rely on the back catalog for everything.
Sure.
And that's a gift to still have that excitement come from the audience. And I think, like, that's a prompt to work harder at the songwriting.
Are you stuck in a rut? Are you tired of listening to that Jimmy Buffett 20th Century Masters CD over and over again and need some new music? Are you sick of making hamburger helper beef stroganoff for dinner every night and you want something new to cook? What you are looking for, my friends, is the Enthusiast Digest. That's my monthly newsletter, which arrives in your inbox the first Sunday morning of every month, bursting with musical recommendations, poetry selections, recipes and cooking techniques for my favorite dishes, and items of general interest culled from the vast cesspool that is the internet. The Enthusiast Digest is free to subscribe to. If you dig the poetry that you hear on this show and the artists that you're hearing from, you'll dig the newsletter, because I approach it with the exact same sensibility of curation. Go to joepugmusic.com/newsletter today to sign up for free. That is joepugmusic.com/newsletter. It takes approximately 15 seconds to sign up for a free newsletter that will enrich the first Sunday of your month with a veritable cornucopia of new and delightful recommendations. That's the Enthusiast Digest, the first Sunday of every month. Sign up for free at joepugmusic.com/newsletter. If you take a bird's eye view of Dave's creative output for the last 2 decades, I'd say he's been as prolific as any writer I can call to mind. That flood of creative work speaks to a deep connection he has not with the fruits of his labor, but with the labor itself. And what poet would be a better exemplar of that ethos than the great Wendell Berry? Here we have his poem number 12 from the collection A Small Porch. The old man is in the last days of work he has done and loved for many years. He is mowing with his old team, the white horse and the black, on the open hillside, under the open sky, within the surrounding woods. This work once was known by many of his kind, and he is one of the last to know it. But now, as his time grows scarce, his work rarer by the day, its sights and motions could be filmed, its sounds recorded. It could be preserved perhaps forever by wonders of modern technology. He says no. He thinks no. He refuses with his whole heart the already futile wish to make. He refuses with his whole heart the already futile wish to make of a past present a future past. Being so saved, his days would be lost, would be no longer even a memory. He needs these last of his work days. He needs them to be his last, his own, such days as do not come to one unwilling to let them go. Had he been unwilling for them to go, they would not yet have come. Had he not been glad to be the only one to know them, he would never have known them. If he remembers them to the last, giving his thanks, how great will be his reward. Speaking of that songwriting, you kind of foreshadowed this a little bit earlier in the conversation, talking about how the tour itself that you were on and your mental space and your witnessing of the modern American city in kind of post-COVID world led into the writing of your most recent record, Drive It Like It's Stolen. Can you kind of describe in more granular detail, especially how that idea of like the dying American city, or what you perceived to be the dying American city at the time, how that kind of played into the writing of this most recent record?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times, this feeling where you make a record and it does its thing and it has some level of success or whatever, or accolades. And then you're like, I did that. I want to do something else. I want to follow the muse. And for Blood Harmony, I was really fascinated and in love with this idea of family. I think things had sort of slowed down because of the pandemic, and I was able to really be present with my kids. And it just was a gift. It was like, I got a second chance at life. And look, I've got a wife and children, and oh my God, look at all these ties that we have to bring us together. And I miss my brother, and there was all these things to feed that record. And I think the writing of Drive It Like It's Stolen was a lot more of me. These kids are going out to preschool, and we're having to go, take them to the grocery store, or interface with more people. And then I'm going out to cities, back to work, and realizing, like, what have we done? Have we brought, like, unwittingly these souls that are so precious to us into a broken world, a world that it can't sustain them? Or, I think the anxiety of being a parent was starting to really press. And so, I think a lot of it had to do with that. Like, I kept saying that Los Angeles or San Francisco or whatever looked like the prequel to 12 Monkeys. It was like, oh my God, like the homeless situation is out of hand, and, the crime is up, and, you see all these reports of lawlessness or whatever. I don't know how much stock to put in that, but you could sense a palpable desperation in various places where we were going to play that I didn't sense before. And so, being hopefully a responsible parent, you're like, oh my God, are we living in a bubble at home and this is what's in store for them? Or, I also kind of, I'm such a big fan of The Wire and David Simon's take on basically the idea that if we don't get the American city right, the species is doomed. It's the only way forward if we can figure out how to synthesize that human interaction, people living kind of close together and sharing services and so on and so forth. That the species might not make it. And so to go into, with that backdrop, like that sort of being like a central tenet of how I think, it didn't look good. And so you're like, well, shit, does this mean we're doomed kind of thing? And so I think a lot of the writing in this record came from that kind of feeling, like, it's not looking so good. And if it's not looking so good, what does that mean? What does that mean for me and my family and us as a species and, people? Like, what do we do when it's not looking so good? And that sort of swirl is kind of what the record and the songs came out of.
Nothing like being a parent to make you focus on that fragility of the world and that kind of dangerousness of the world. I think, both of you, we've kind of spent this conversation talking about how similar you and I are in the experiences that we've had. And I know my experience has been, and probably yours too, from the age 18 on, it's just been kind of like, yeah, man, I can go out into the world and there's some weird things that the world has to throw at me, but pretty much I can contend with the world. I can make a place within it. I will be able to either avoid or contend with the malevolence that's out there, and no problem. And I now have, 20 years of that experience, so I feel pretty confident in it. Well, then you have kids, and you worry, oh man, are they going to be able to hack it? And I think like your first instinct can kind of be like, well, we need to make the world not broken. We need to make it better. And it's like, well, the world has been broken. Humanity doesn't change. And in some ways, well, and that is a religious idea that the world is broken, and that humanity lives within it. And I think you eventually do come around to the idea that it's like, well, you need to make children you need to form them in a way that makes them resilient and able to contend with a broken world and thrive within it,
Yeah, and bear in mind, I'm raising Californians, so when it gets even to be like 50 degrees, these people fall apart.
You got to get back on the East Coast, man. Come on.
No, I'm kidding. I mean, but it is funny how your sensibility does guide you, and I have to check that often. I have to go like, well, they don't know any colder,
Yeah.
But there's part of me that goes like, you kids are never going to make it if you think this is cold.
Dude, that's just, I saw, or even like the cultural stuff. And I know I sound like an old man when I say this, but my kids were watching a show the other day, and out of the corner of my ear, I just hear someone on the show say, they go, asking for help is my superpower. And I was like, fuck this shit. No. No. Asking for help is totally fine, but it's not a superpower. Like, we've really denigrated superpowers.
Oh, I love it. I know I feel the same way about a lot of that stuff. But it's funny because my wife is a therapist.
Yeah.
And actually studies this and actually went to college,
Yes.
which I didn't do.
Same. I didn't finish
when
it.
I old man something
Yeah.
and go like, what they need is good, firm discipline or,
Yeah.
some kind of old school thing. She's like, well, I understand where you're coming from.
Right.
But here's a study, and I'll get an email within an hour or two of our somewhat bristly conversation where
Yeah.
I'm the one prompting this bristling, and then I'll read it and go like, well, thank God for their mom, for Smith and Harrison's mom, because she has like empirical data to back up her point, just like Alex did with the ticket counts. He was like, look, man, you how you feel about this is one thing, but what's actually happening is a different thing. And being able to recognize that that's my superpower.
A superpower that I'm not able to access very often, but when I am.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Yeah, I mean, it really does. It's tough because, we're raising kids in these little bubbles, these sort of left-leaning communities or whatever it is. And there is a part of me that feels like, am I doing these kids a disservice? The world is not going to be very soft to them, and we're being very soft to them as parents. We're allowing them all this space to have their emotions and all this stuff. And part of me is like, part of the reason I was able to live life is I was raised with some grit. I was raised in a town that punches back, and this kind of thing. And so it's hard. It's hard to get a hold on that, and you just have to take little steps and make sure each one you kind of hopefully step with some thought and love, and hope it shakes out okay. I don't know. I mean, that's the weird thing too about being a parent, is I don't really have any more answers.
Well, that's the Philip Larkin poem. Your parents, they fuck you up. They don't mean to, but they do. And that's
right.
That's the whole poem. And
we're doing just that. There'll be studies 20 years from now where my kids can turn and go, "You guys totally missed the boat on this." And I do that to my own dad, So it's you just hope maybe. I mean, you go back to that age old idea that maybe the arc of the universe bends towards justice and things of that nature, and hopefully we're putting our backs into that effort.
I think it bends towards entropy myself.
You do. But how do you think that as a dad? Like, how do you square those things?
I square it with the fact that I don't have control over everything, and I control what I can control, and you just have to. Personally, I have faith in a higher power. I believe I have a maker who loves me, and who in the final analysis, maybe not in the moment, but in the final analysis, I have a maker that loves me. So I'll be okay, and so will my children. So I make it through with faith, basically.
Beautiful. This is a great thing to learn because I was raised evangelical Christian, have all this wrestling with it and so on, and at different points called myself an atheist or an agnostic or whatever. But there is an element, the whole Bruce Springsteen concept that it gets in your blood and it never goes away is true, and so I just read Bono's book as well, and it was one of these things where I was sort of reading about his faith and how it's informed his life and how much good he's done for the world based off that faith. And I thought, wow, he went through a lot of the same early evangelical kind of weird things that I did, but his takeaway was a lot more healthy and a lot more positive and a lot wiser about the human experience. And so it's interesting to hear you say that, because I'm like, okay, well, here's another guy I respect who does the same job as me, who's talking about faith, and it's a compelling thing to have kind of re-enter my life and I got to examine it a little bit more.
Yeah,
here in my 40s.
Well, I think I think that it's not an option to not have faith in something. I think,
right.
G.K. Chesterton said, it's a brilliant quote. It said, "When man ceases to believe in God, he doesn't believe in nothing. He'll believe in anything." And I've noticed that a lot with my friends who are very militantly agnostic or atheistic, which is, it's like, okay, well, maybe I seem like the relic for believing what I believe. And you can call me that all you want, but then in the same breath, they'll also be like, "But also check out this $500 healing crystal I have. It's fantastic." It's like, all right. So I'm the crazy one? Really?
Well, sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm totally right there with you. And I think by virtue of having to defend so many times my Christian family, because it's one thing for me to critique them. It's kind of, I'm like, yeah, you guys are all crazy.
Sure.
And then when other people do that, I'm like, whoa. You guys are being really judgmental. Like, everybody's belief is, it's a nuanced thing. Not everybody is Jerry Falwell Jr. And, this whole thing. And so you're right. I've had to really look at it from both sides, or I've decided to look at it from as many sides as I can, because neither thing is totally comfortable. A full belief in all of that stuff was a suit that didn't fit as a young man, and then now atheism, I'm like, well, this is just as dogmatic. Like, I mean, granted, it's a little bit more scientific or whatever, but generally speaking, what you said is true, that faith is necessary to get kind of anything done. I mean, we have faith that someone's going to buy our record. We have faith that our kids are going to safely come home from school. We have faith that our festival's going to happen. It's big and small things that you have little faith in. So it's not that crazy to me anymore. It's not.
So talk to me then a bit about how you kind of have this vision for the record, or you start writing in this direction. Maybe you start to notice that the songs are developing a theme. You go and work again in Nashville with the great and powerful Will Hogue. He's producing the record and I think arranging it to a certain degree as well. How did that process look different than Blood Harmony, and what were some of the things that were happening creatively in the process that helped to kind of further excavate that theme that you were discovering?
I was worried because the Blood Harmony session seemed like Will at his most powerful, because he put together an all-star band. We had, guys from Bruce Springsteen's band and Isbell's band and all this other jazz. And it was in a beautiful studio. It was in Sound Emporium, and it was just like the classic thing you think of when you think of making records. It was a great console and a great room and an actual B3 in there and all that jazz. And I knew this record was not that. I was like, I don't want to make a roots record. These songs aren't appropriate for that. I mean, we need more modern production in that. I need other sounds to kind of inform all this. I needed strings, I needed horns, I needed loops. I was working with loops in the demos, and also having gotten a little bit of acceptance in that Americana world on the last record, I was also immersed in it more, and I found a lot of the production to be like, this is okay, but I mean, most of the stuff that was blowing my skirt up was happening in hip hop and pop. I just think like that a lot of those production elements, when they mix with what I do, which is essentially rock, was just more, like I really like that band Idols, and I really like Gang of Youths and Arcade Fire always, a lot of that stuff, the indie production, the national, a lot of that stuff was sort of drifting in on the wind as I was making the songs and demoing the songs. So when I went to Will with this, I was like, look, can you do this? I want to play the live band just like a fader. I don't want it to be a live band where, like, I want to construct a lot of this in the studio, and then when it's time to bring the live band in, maybe they'll play 16 bars of the end of the song, or they'll, Will and I could construct certain drum stuff, the drum machines, and then drum loops that we can build right there and then play the song to that. So I was a little nervous, but his enthusiasm was just as unbridled as it always is. He was like, yeah, we can do that. Let's try it. Mm-hmm. And David Axelrod, the guy that engineered both, is just great. I mean, he has enough of like an indie rock background, or whatever you want to call that. He's heard enough records and made enough records that he sort of pretty quickly understood where I was going to. And I think also by virtue of being in Nashville, it's easy to find somebody who can play horns, or strings. Yeah. Like, they're all right there. So we did it a lot more. We did it a lot more in pieces. And I think we only did a day or something with a live band. We just hired a live band that was, people that Will knew, and, Tom Bukovac was supposed to play guitar, but he got COVID, so he called this other guy in, Chris. And I think having made one record in the sort of traditional rootsy kind of way gave me more insight and gave me more courage to just use that or don't. And I guess on some level it was like, well, we did that. Why would we want to do it again? And it's not like Blood Harmony sold 50,000 copies. So we didn't have the pressure to repeat it. It was like, well, It worked. It worked with our audience, mm-hmm. and expanded it a little bit, but it wasn't like, oh, we had a hit with that, we got to do that again. It was like, let's just do whatever the songs are demanding. So the process was really fun, really different. And, I think I'm also just at a point where I want to keep changing. I want to keep moving forward production wise. I think my next challenge artistically is to start to write from more and more different perspectives. There's some spots on the new record where I kind of was writing more in character, or not necessarily talking about my perspective, but the broader perspective I was trying to write from, or whatever. And I think trying to get into some new fields is kind of the goal, you know, like I want to keep moving forward and keep growing. I mean, my favorite songwriters are people who keep blossoming in their like 70s and stuff, you know, like Paul Simon he puts out a new record and you know it's probably going to be his best record. So, you know, I think that was kind of what was informing it, and Will stepped up to the plate, didn't understand all of it, but also kind of at different points took his hands off the wheel and was like, if you know what to do here, steer. And I would, and then we sort of were able to synthesize it together. And a lot of that just has to do with the faith that develops over making a bunch of music together.
I would be remiss if we didn't get into this interview before we leave today. You are now not only a singer and a songwriter and a record label owner, but you are now the impresario of a music festival that's coming up in Philly, Sing Us Home Fest. Why I think this is brilliant is you've been in the music business for 20 years and you've finally figured out that the only way to actually make money is to be the person selling the beer. We've been the suckers bringing the people in to buy the beer all this time, and now you finally figured out. Talk to me about the what was the vision for this particular festival? Why did you start this festival, and what makes it different than other festivals that you've seen, and what did you want to put into it, you know, that you thought would be improving on other festivals that you've played before in your life?
Okay, well, I think there's two sides to this answer. One is the crass commercial answer, which I shouldn't say. You know, ultimately, you're right that you do make more money if you're selling the beer. And if we are going to tour less, and I'm going to spend more time with my kids while they're young, we have to do something to balance out that lack of income where we play every night, you know? So that was part of the germ of the idea. So I will be honest in that way. And so that was kind of what Alex said. Like, look, if you want to tour less and be with your kids, fine, but you're going to make less money unless you do something big like this, something more risky, etc. So I said, oh man, I didn't get into this to be a festival promoter. I got into this to be Eddie Van Halen. And he was like, well, you're not Eddie Van Halen. So what you gonna let's figure out what else you're going to do. And I think, you know, you've got this podcast, and I think that in some way that's kind of like a festival. That's a place where other ideas are shared. Yes. You're able to tour less. You're able to get add context to your work and to other people's work. And I think that is awesome. And I think, you know, but I don't have a good enough idea for a podcast, you know, like I don't, so that's an option, you know, but this idea started to grow, realizing like, well, wait a second, there aren't really that many festivals in Philadelphia. Right. And if we did it in a way that felt like a family reunion, which we have a big family, and, you know, I have that whole punk rock side of what I do. And I've been able to do lots of songwriter rounds and things like that, where it's like, that also has a really similar type of community, you know, where you really connect in those kinds of things. And I thought, wait a second, the festival I would always want to play, if I could, would be one that the Indigo Girls played Friday night and Bad Religion played Saturday night, because I have equal respect for both of their songs, right, and equal respect for how they've you know, conducted themselves in their career. They're they're basically the same kind of thing. It's just some people get into the aesthetic of one and some people get into the aesthetic of the other. That's why I made that Patty Griffin and Patty Costello covers record. It was like, I like Dillinger Ford just as much as I like Patty Griffin. And so Alex was like, well, let's lean into that. You know, let's make a party And I mean, you've got tons of friends in the town, and they could bring their food. And so once the idea started to kind of pull out of the gates, I was like, wow, this could be really fun. And, you know, I've never gotten an opportunity to play with the Drive-By Truckers before. I mean, for whatever reason. And now they're playing with us. You know, they're going to play right after us at our festival. So on some level, there's an ability to connect with a band that I've had a deep respect and love for a long time and just have never really crossed paths with, just a little bit here and there. Kathleen Edwards, you know, this is someone, I love her music, and we've, you know, been mutual admirers of each other, but we haven't gone on tour. I mean, you can't tour with everybody. It's just, it's impossible. Exactly. And so suddenly she's playing our songwriter round with Craig Finn, who's an old friend, somebody I love. So it, you know, as it starts to coalesce and move forward, you're like, this is going to be a lot of fun. And it's funny because there's tons of anxiety with it. Is it going to be successful? Is it going to sink us? You know, is it going to, you know, are we going to have to go out on tour for 6 straight weeks in the fall because we didn't make any money? You know, maybe. But one thing that friends of mine have, or a friend of mine who's helping with the production side of it said was, don't look at the ticket counts, because you're going to just do what you set out to do. Have a great time. Everything else will sort itself out. And on some level, it was a reminder that that's what I've been doing for my entire life. It's like, I'm going to do this thing that I really like to do, and hopefully it works out. And it has so far, you know, because, and I think like some of that's just luck, and some of that's courage, and some of that is, you know, taking the audience and their perspective into consideration, which we talked about earlier in this conversation, where it's like, all right, well, these people are spending their hard-earned money to come to our club show or our festival or whatever. Like, what would I want to see? And if I would want to see it 9 times out of 10, I'm not that esoteric, you know, like there's plenty of people out there who want to see Indigo Girls on Friday and Bad Religion on Saturday, sure, or Brandy Carlisle on Saturday and Rancid on Sunday, whatever, you know, like I don't think it's that far off. And so that's what we're hoping to do in our old neighborhood, in a way that's dignified and fun. And, you know, we'll see, man. I'm trying not to look at the ticket counts and just be excited about the pierogies and the rock and roll.
Pierogies and rock and roll. Love it. Dave, it's a pleasure to have you back on the show. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me, man. It's great to see you. And I owe you a telephone call where we can get into all of the ups and downs of parenting and rock and roll.
Woo, there's a lot of downs, but we'll talk about that soon. I'm going to stop recording. This week's show is brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. Use promo code TWS, the initials of our podcast, TWS, to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. Dave Hause's forthcoming album is entitled Drive It Like It's Stolen, available everywhere music is sold or streamed very soon. If before we meet again you sit down to write, please remember, an expensive drug habit is not a song, a compelling Instagram account is not a song, and most importantly, reverb is not a song. So let all that take care of itself, and for you, just keep your eye on the song.